My name is Alexandra Hayes. I'm 28 years old, and I'm a lieutenant in the United States Navy. I grew up in a small coastal village in Maine where the ocean was always my truth. The smell of sea salt, the sound of seagulls, and the rocking of boats in the harbor were the backdrop to my childhood. But not everything was as calm as the sea on a calm day. When I was just 12 years old, my father, a respected fisherman in the community, disappeared during a freak storm. 3 days later, his boat was found, but his body was never found. My mother, Susan, was devastated, as if a part of her had also been swept away by the waves that night. 2 years after the tragedy, we met Richard Matthews, a retired Navy officer who moved to our town. He was strict, disciplined, and seemed to have answers for everything. My mother, perhaps seeking reassurance after so much loss, quickly fell in love with him. 6 months later, they were married, and I had a stepfather. Richard had his own idea about how a family should function. Strict meal times, household chores, distributed with military precision and no room for questioning. Discipline builds character, he repeated constantly, as if it were a sacred mantra. To my mother, it seemed like this structure helped her cope with grief. To me, it was suffocating. From the beginning, Richard made it clear he had little faith in my ambition. When I mentioned, at 16, that I dreamed of entering the Naval Academy, he laughed. "The Navy is no place for fragile girls who grew up reading adventure novels," he said. "You'll never handle the pressure." His words, instead of discouraging me, lit a fire under my feet. I started running on the beach every morning before school. I joined the swim team and dedicated myself to my studies like never before. Every time Richard told me I couldn't do it, I pushed myself even harder. My mother, caught between her husband and daughter, tried to mediate our conflicts, but rarely spoke out against him. My senior year of high school, I received the letter that would change my life. I had been accepted to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. When I showed it to my mother at dinner, tears welled in my eyes. Richard just chewed his chicken slowly, swallowed, and said, "We'll see how long you last there." The Naval Academy was simultaneously heaven and hell. The first few weeks as plebes freshmen were designed to break and rebuild us. Waking up at 5:30 a.m., impeccably tidy room, perfectly aligned, uniforms and constant pressure from superiors. Many quit that first month. I refused to be one of them. Every letter I wrote home was met with encouraging words from my mother and skeptical comments from Richard. "Have you thought about what you'll do when you give up?" he'd ask. His words, though painful, became my fuel. On nights when I thought about giving up, I remembered his condescending smile and found the strength to keep going. In my third year, I specialized in naval engineering and discovered a genuine passion for ships and their mechanics. My performance placed me at the top of my class, and I was selected for a special leadership training program. When Richard found out, he simply said I was lucky. Graduation day arrived on an unseasonably warm May. The campus was filled with proud families, American flags, and the promise of bright futures. My mother cried when she saw me in my white dress uniform. Richard, surprisingly, came too. The ceremony was grand, like everything else in the Navy. Each graduate walked onto the stage to receive their diploma and official rank. When my name was called Alexandra Hayes, I felt a mixture of pride and anxiety. I walked steadily as we had rehearsed countless times, aware that hundreds of eyes were watching. As I received my diploma and shook the commander's hand, I glanced briefly at the audience. My mother was smiling through her tears. Richard, sitting next to her, had an unmoving expression. As I stepped off the stage, I walked past them. It was then that I heard him mutter, loud enough for me to hear, "You're finished. Real life starts now, and you're not ready." His words hit me like a punch in the gut, but I maintained my composure. The ceremony continued. I was lining up with my company when I noticed something strange happening a few meters away. One of the honor guard cadets, holding ceremonial rifle, began to visibly sway. The intense heat, the pressure of the moment, and likely dehydration were taking their toll. Before anyone could react, the cadet fainted. His body slumped forward, and the rifle slipped from his hand. In military formation, when someone carries weapons in ceremony, they form what we call a stack, a specific configuration. If one member falls, the entire formation can destabilize, creating a potentially dangerous and certainly embarrassing domino effect. Without a second thought, I broke formation and ran toward the fallen cadet. In one swift movement, I grabbed the rifle before it hit the ground and steadied the fainting young man. "I need medical assistance here," I shouted, remaining calm despite the unexpected situation. 2 medical officers rushed toward us. Together, we discreetly removed the cadet from the stage while I held tightly to the rifle. Another cadet quickly took the vacant position, and the ceremony continued without further interruption. Later, when the formalities were over and families gathered to celebrate, the Academy Commandant took me aside. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, "your action today demonstrated exactly the kind of quick thinking and leadership we expect from Annapolis officers. To intervene in that manner, maintain the dignity of the ceremony, and, most importantly, ensure the safety of a fellow officer. That is what it means to be a naval officer." When I returned to my family, Richard looked uncomfortable. "It was just a reflex," he said, downplaying the incident. My mother, however, hugged me tightly. "I'm so proud of you, Alex. I always knew you were born for this." That night, at a celebratory dinner, Richard finally broke his typical silence. After 2 glasses of wine, he said something I'll never forget. "Maybe I was wrong about you, Alexandra. Maybe you really do have what it takes." It was the closest I could get to recognition from him, and I decided to accept it. Deep down, I knew my journey in the Navy was just beginning, and that many challenges lay ahead. But in that moment, I had proven something not only to Richard, but most importantly to myself. I belonged there. My first assignment after graduation was as an engineering officer on the USS Liberty, a state-of-the-art destroyer. The transition from academic life to a live ship was intense. Suddenly, I was responsible for a crew of 25 sailors, many of whom had years of sea experience. At first, I noticed the skeptical looks. A young lieutenant fresh out of the academy ordering around veterans? I knew I'd need to earn their respect not just by my rank, but by my actions. Captain Roberts, Liberty's commanding officer, was a man of few words, but he observed everything. In the first few weeks, I felt his eyes constantly assessing me. "Hayes," he told me, after a routine inspection in the Navy, "your value isn't in what you say you can do, but in what I'm watching you." That pressure reminded me of Richard, but somehow it was different. Captain Roberts didn't want to see me fail. He wanted to see me grow. My first major test came 3 months later, during a multinational exercise in the Pacific. We were in joint operations with Japanese and Australian ships when a main propulsion system failure threatened to leave the Liberty adrift. "Lieutenant Hayes to the engine room." "Now?" The captain's voice boomed over the loudspeakers. When I got there, I found chaos, steam escaping from a compromised valve, alarms blaring, and sailors rushing to contain the damage. The chief engineer, the 50-year-old man named Ortiz, who rarely smiled at me, looked relieved to see me. "Lieutenant, the secondary coolant system has failed, and we're losing pressure in reactor 2. We have about 8 minutes before we need to shut down the main system." I quickly assessed the situation. "Show me the diagrams," I asked. As Ortiz spread the technical diagrams out on a table, my mind returned to my classes at the academy. There was a workaround for this problem, but it was risky and had never been tested in real-world conditions. "We can divert the flow through auxiliary system through bypassing the damaged circuit entirely," I suggested. Ortiz frowned. "This has never been done outside of simulations, Lieutenant. If we fail, we could lose the ship. And if we don't try, we'll certainly be adrift in international waters," I replied, feeling the weight of the decision. "I take responsibility." With Captain Roberts's reluctant approval over the radio, we began the procedure. My team followed every instruction precisely, while I monitored the pressure levels with my heart in my throat. There was a terrifying moment when everything seemed to fail. Lights flashing, alarms intensifying, and then, as if by a miracle, the system stabilized. "Propulsion restored to 85% capacity, Captain," I radioed, barely able to hide the relief in my voice. "Good work, Lieutenant Hayes," Roberts replied. "Keep that ship moving." When we finally returned to port in San Diego a week later, something had changed. The sailors under my command looked at me differently, with genuine respect. Chief Ortiz, disembarking, stopped beside me. "Good work out there, Lieutenant. You have good instincts." That first year at sea taught me more about leadership than all my years at the academy. I learned that leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about keeping your cool when no one else can. It's about taking responsibility, not just authority. While on leave, I returned home to visit. My mother, Richard, surprisingly seemed eager to hear my sea story. Sitting on the porch of the house where I grew up, I told him about the incident in the Pacific. "It seems you found your place, Alexandra," he said, and for once, I didn't detect sarcasm in his voice. "Your father would be proud." Richard's mention of my biological father was unprecedented. "You really think so?" I asked, feeling an unexpected emotion. "He loved the sea as much as you do," Richard replied, looking at the horizon, perhaps more than he should. That night, my mother showed me a box she'd kept for years, my father's belongings that she'd never had the courage to open after his disappearance. Among yellowed letters and faded photographs, I found his ship's log. The last pages revealed that he'd considered joining the Navy but never had the opportunity. "It looks like you're living his dream too," my mother said, holding my hand. Back on the Liberty, I was promoted to lieutenant commander. After 2 years of exemplary service, my reputation as an engineer officer who solved impossible problems grew, and I soon received a new assignment, serving as Executive Officer XO on the USS Resilience, a newly commissioned amphibious assault ship. The Resilience was larger, more complex, and its mission involved direct coordination with the Marine. As XO, I would be second in command, responsible for the day-to-day operations of the ship and its crew of over 700. Commander Sophia Chone, captain of the Resilient, had an impressive track record and a reputation for demanding excellence. At our first meeting, she was blunt. "Hayes, I've heard good things about you. They say you're resourceful under pressure and that your crew would follow you to hell. Let's see if that's true. This ship leaves for the Mediterranean in 3 weeks, and we have a lot of work to do before then." Those 3 weeks were a marathon of preparation, emergency crew training, supply loading, and coordination with the Marine unit we would transport. I slept only 4 hours a night, but I felt more alive than ever. The night before we set sail, I received an unexpected call. It was Richard. "Alexandra." Her voice sounded strange over the phone. "Your mother had an accident. She fell down the stairs and is in the hospital." My blood ran cold. "How bad?" "The doctors say she'll make a full recovery, but she asked for you. I think she wishes you were here." At that moment, I faced the first major conflict between my family and my duty. The Resilience was leaving at dawn for a 6-month deployment. As XO, my presence was crucial, but my mother needed me. I spent the night awake, and at 5 a.m., I knocked on the door of Commander Chun's cabin. "Commander," he said as he entered, "I need to request emergency family. My mother is in the hospital." Chun studied me for a long moment. "I understand your situation, Hay, but do you understand what you're asking? We're about to depart on a critical mission." "Yes, ma'am. I understand completely." She took a deep breath. "If it were any other officer, but I know your dedication. Go to your mother. We have Lieutenant Rodriguez as backup. You have 4 days. On the 5th day, I expect you to join us in Rota, Spain, our first stop." "Thank you very much, ma'am. I'll be there." I flew to Maine that morning. At the hospital, I found my mother with a cast on her leg and bruises on her face, but conscious and alert. "Alec," she smiled when she saw me. "Shouldn't you be on a ship right now?" I explained the situation as I held her hand. Richard, sitting on the other side of the bed, seemed genuinely concerned for her. "It was my fault," he said unexpectedly. "I should have fixed that loose step months ago." In the days that followed, I helped arrange my mother's return home and hired a nurse to assist her during her recovery. Richard and I formed a silent trio, united by our love for my mother. The day before I left, he surprised me with a confession. "I've always been too hard on you, Alexandra." Maybe because I saw in you a determination that I myself had lost over the years. "What do you mean?" I asked, intrigued by this rare display of vulnerability. "My Navy career didn't end the way I planned," he explained. "I was discharged after a disagreement with a superior. I spent years stewing over it, and when you came along with the same dream, I think I projected my own failures onto you. That conversation changed something fundamental between us. It didn't erase years of conflict, but it opened a door to something new: mutual understanding, perhaps even respect." The next day, I boarded a military flight to Spain, determined to fulfill my promise to Commander Chun. The Air Force C-130 landed in Rota just 2 hours before Resilience was scheduled to depart. Cutting it thin, Lieutenant Commander Chun commented as I reported to the bridge, exhausted but ready for duty. "I never break a promise, Commander," I replied. She nodded, satisfied. "Prepare the ship to sail." Our mission in the Mediterranean was officially maritime presence and security, but we all knew the situation in the region was tense. Civil unrest on the North African coast had escalated, and American and Allied citizens could need evacuation at any moment. For weeks, we conducted exercises with other NATO forces, always on standby. Resilience was a floating city, and as XO, I was essentially the mayor responsible for everything from systems maintenance to crew well-being. It was during a seemingly calm night, when we were anchored near the coast of Sicily, that the alarm sounded. I ran to the bridge, still buttoning my uniform. "We received an SOS from a merchant vessel 30 nautical miles away," Chun reported as soon as I arrived. "Liberian flag but multinational crew, including 6 Americans. They report a fire on board and compromised containment system." "How long until we get there?" I asked, already weighing our options. 2 hours at full speed. We are the closest military vessel. The helicopter? Ready for takeoff in 15 minutes, but weather is deteriorating. Storm approaching. "Permission to lead the rescue team, Commander?" I requested. Chun hesitated only for a second. "Granted. Take Bravo Squad. I want updates every 15 minutes. Within half an hour, I was aboard an MH-60 Seahawk with a specialized rescue team. As we approached the merchant ship, the Constellation, the situation seemed even worse than initial reports. Flames were consuming the center section. Thick, black smoke was billowing into the night sky. "Over Resilience, we have target in sight," I reported over the radio. "The fire is out of control on the main deck and in the engine room." Proceeding with the approach, the pilot, Lieutenant Wilson, shouted over the roar of the propellers, "Lieutenant Commander, that storm is coming in faster than anticipated. We have at most 40 minutes before landing becomes impossible." "Understood. Let's make this quick." Landing on the Constellation's helipad, partially shrouded in smoke, required exceptional skill from Wilson. As soon as we touched down, my team split up as planned. Naval firefighters to contain the fire, medics to treat potential victims, and a search and rescue team with me. "Haze to Resilience," I called as we advanced. "Landing successful. Initiating search and evacuation operation." The ship's interior was a smoky maze. Wearing oxygen masks and thermal gear, we located 14 crew members taking refuge in the forward mess hall. Some had burns, and all were suffering from smoke inhalation. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Hayes, United States Navy," I announced to the startled group. "We're going to get you out of here." As we organized the evacuation, the Constellation's captain, a middle-aged Greek man named Stavros, informed me, "We still have 3 crew members trapped in the engine room. We tried to reach them, but the fire... I consulted the ship's map he showed me. The engine room was at the center of the fire. "How many entrances are there?" 2. "The main entrance is completely blocked by flame. The secondary entrance, through the storage compartment, might be possible." I divided my team. Sergeant Martinez would lead the evacuation of the crew members already found, while I and 2 other rescuers would try to reach the engine room. Haze to Seahawk 1. "How much time do we have?" The pilot's response was not encouraging. 25 minutes, Lieutenant Commander. "The storm has accelerated." The path to the engine room was a nightmare. Dark corridors filled with toxic smoke, hot metal doors, a constant roar of approaching. We used thermal imaging equipment to identify safe passage points. When we finally reached the secondary entrance, we found the door blocked by debris. "We need to open this," I shouted to the 2 sailors with me. Together, using hydraulic rescue equipment, we managed to create a sufficient opening. The inside of the engine room was a literal inferno. Flames danced over pools of spilled oil, and the heat was almost unbearable, even with our protective gear. "Anyone here?" I shouted, though I doubted anyone could survive in those conditions. To my surprise, a faint movement came from behind a large generator. 3 men, wearing makeshift masks made from wet t-shirts, were crouched in a small space where the fire hadn't yet reached. "We're here to rescue you," I announced, trying to sound calm as my heart raced. "You need to come with us now." One of them, clearly injured, couldn't walk. The other two were disoriented by the smoke. We distributed our spare oxygen masks and began the return journey. The way back seemed twice as long. I carried the injured man on my shoulders in a fireman's carry, while my companions guided the other two. The ship's structure was beginning to groan dangerously, signs that its structural integrity was compromised. Haze to Seahawk 1. We are returning with 3 survivors. Condition critical. Estimated time of arrival, 7 minutes. Understood, Lieutenant Commander. We have 12 minutes before takeoff becomes impossible. When we finally emerged onto the deck, the storm had arrived. Torrential rain lashed the ship, and strong winds threatened to destabilize the waiting helicopter with its rotors spinning. The first group of rescued men had already departed in another helicopter. We handed the 3 rescued men over to the waiting medics and prepared to board. It was then that I felt the deck moving abnormally beneath me. "The ship is listing," I shouted. "All aboard now," Pilot Wilson radioed. "Lieutenant Commander, we need to take off in 2 minutes or we won't be able to get out." We did a quick head count. Everyone was on board, except, "Where's Lieutenant Garcia?" I asked, realizing one of my rescuers was missing. "He went back to check if there was anyone else," replied one of the sailors. Without hesitation, I unbuckled my seatbelt. "Hold this position for exactly 2 minutes. If we don't return, leave without us." "Hayes, no," Wilson protested. "That's an order, Lieutenant." I dove back into the burning ship, calling for Garcia. I found him a deck below, dragging an unconscious man no one had noticed before. "Help me with him," Garcia shouted when he saw me. Together, we carried the unconscious man through the rickety corridors. The ship was now listing at least 15 degrees, making every step a challenge. When we reached the deck, the rain hit us like freezing needles. The helicopter was still there, rotors spinning furiously against the storm's wind. We handed the unconscious man to the medical team and jumped aboard in the final second. "Take OFF," Wilson yelled, pulling back on the controls as the constellation began to turn dangerous. The helicopter rose heavily, fighting the gusts of wind. Below, the merchant ship finally succumbed to the flames, turning on its side as water flooded its compartment. "Hazed resilience," I reported, still panting. "Mission accomplished. All crew rescued." Repeat, "All rescued." Commander Chun's voice replied, clear despite the static. "Excellent work, EXO. Bring everyone home." When we landed on the deck of the Resilience 30 minutes later, Chun was there to greet us, despite the storm. "This went above and beyond the call of duty, Lieutenant Commander," she said as we walked inside, soaked and exhausted. "I just did what any of us would do, Commander." She stopped, gripping my shoulder. "No, Hayes, you've demonstrated a kind of courage that can't be. I'm recommending you for the Navy Medal of Valor." 3 days later, when the rescued men were stable and had been transferred to medical facilities on land, I received an unexpected message. The unconscious man Garcia and I had last rescued was actually an American nuclear physicist on board consulting on a sensitive shipment. The State Department had issued a special thank you. News of the rescue operation even reached the small town in Maine. Richard called me from the hospital, where my mother was having a routine checkup. "Alexandra," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice. "Pride. We just saw the news report about your rescue in the Mediterranean. Your mother keeps telling everyone at the hospital that you're her daughter. How is she?" I asked, feeling homesick in a way I hadn't felt in years, getting better every day. "And I also wanted to say, I'm proud of what you've become, Alexandra. I think I always have been. I just didn't know how to express it." Those words, long awaited, meant more than any medal or official recognition. Over the next few months, our mission in the Mediterranean continued. We participated in maritime security operations, exercises with allies, and another emergency evacuation during a political crisis in a coastal country. With each challenge, our crew grew closer, and my friendship with Commander Chun deepened. On a quiet night, as we watched the stars from the bridge, Chun shared his vision with me. "Hayes, the Navy is changing. We need leaders who don't just follow orders, but who think critically and put people first. Leaders like you. I'm just trying to make a difference, one day at a time," I replied honestly. And that's why I'm recommending you for command of your own ship, she revealed. The USS Intrepid will need a new captain in 6 months, and your name is at the top of my list. The possibility of commanding my own ships, something I hadn't even considered so early in my career, in my wildest dreams, seemed surreal. When our tour of duty ended and we returned to the United States, I was greeted with 2 surprises: confirmation of the Navy Medal for Valor, an official notification that I was being considered for command of the USS Intrepid, an Arla Burke-class battleship. The award ceremony was held in Washington, D.C., with several high-ranking officials in attendance. To my surprise, my mother and Richard showed up. Richard wearing a formal suit that felt uncomfortable on his body, accustomed to more practical clothing. "I wouldn't miss this for anything," my mother said, hugging me tightly. She looked more fragile than I remembered, but her eyes shone with the same pride as always. Richard, standing beside her, extended his hand formally. When I shook it, he pulled me into an awkward hug, the first in all our years together. "Well done, Captain," he murmured, using the title I didn't yet officially possess. After the ceremony, during a small family dinner, Richard handed me a package wrapped in plain brown paper. "I found this among my old things," he explained. "I thought you should have it." Inside the package was an antique naval compass, polished and in perfect working order. On the back, an inscription: "To navigate uncharted seas, trust your heart as much as the stars." It was my father's, Richard said, avoiding my gaze. "He served in World War II. He told me this compass brought him home safely through storms and battles." I was speechless. At that gesture, it was more than a gift. It was recognition, a passing on of a legacy. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. "I will honor you." "I know you will," he replied. "You're already honoring something much greater." Over the next few weeks, I underwent an intensive series of interviews and assessments for the leadership position. The process was rigorous, designed to test not only my technical knowledge, but also my leadership skills, decision-making under pressure, and resource management. In one of the final panels, a 3-star admiral asked me an unexpected question. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, what would you say is the most important aspect of command?" I thought for a moment before replying, "Trust, sir. Not just the crew's trust in their captain, but the captain's trust in his crew. Without that, a ship is just metal and technology, not an effective force." He nodded slowly. "And how do you build that trust?" "It is achieved daily, through consistent action, leading by example, taking responsibility for mistakes, delegating authority along with responsibility, and most importantly, knowing your team as people, not just as ranks or roles." A week later, I received the news. I would be promoted to commander and would take command of the USS Intrepid in 3 months, becoming one of the youngest female warship captains in the U.S. Navy. The transition to command was simultaneously terrifying and thrilling. Intrepid was smaller than Resilient, but her mission was more combat-focused, a destroyer designed for carrier protection, anti-submarine warfare, and strike operation. My first day as captain was surreal. As I walked down the gangway, the crew lined up at attention, the traditional whistle sounding. I felt the weight of that responsibility. Over 300 lives were literally under my command. The decisions I would make would affect not only the mission, but the well-being of every person on board. "Permission to come aboard?" I formally asked the deck officer. "Permission granted, Commander," he replied, saluting. As I stepped onto the deck as captain, I discreetly touched Richard's compass, now always in my pocket. "USS Intrepid, reporting for duty," I said, returning the salute. The first few weeks in command were an intense learning experience, getting to know each crew member, familiarizing myself with every inch of the ship, and establishing my leadership style. I kept a detailed journal, noting observations, challenges, and small victories. In one of my first entries, I wrote, "Command is not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions of the right people." Today, Chief Officer Moore showed me a solution to the radar communication problem that I never would have considered. I need to remember, my job is not to be the smartest mind in the room, but to bring together the brightest minds and create an environment where they can shine. Our first deployment was to the Gulf of Aden, an area notorious for piracy. The mission was to protect vital trade routes and escort vulnerable merchant vessels. We would be part of a multinational naval force group. The day before our departure, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Michael Garcia, the lieutenant who had risked his life with me in the rescue of the Constellation. He had been transferred to another ship, but he wrote, "Commander Hayes, I learned of your promotion and wanted to express my congratulations. What I learned from you that day on the Constellation shaped my understanding of what it means to be a naval officer. You not only fulfilled your duty, you demonstrated that our first responsibility is always to the people under our protection, even if it means personal risk. I have carried that lesson with me and shared it with others. I wish you fair winds and calm seas on the Intrepid." His words moved me and reaffirmed my leadership philosophy. People first, always. In the Red Sea, we faced our first real test. A commercial vessel had been boarded by pirates, and we were the closest military vessel. The situation was delicate, hostages on board, armed attackers, and little reliable information about the exact number of both. I summoned my officers to the war room. "What are our options?" I asked, spreading maps and intelligence reports across the table. My chief officer, Lieutenant Commander Moore, a seasoned man with 3 tours in the Middle East, presented the traditional approach. We could try a direct approach. We have a trained VBSS visit, board, search, and seizure team ready. With the element of surprise, we could retake the ship. Tactical Officer Lieutenant Joe disagreed. "The risk to the hostages is too high. I suggest a blockade surround the ship, cut off communications and supplies, and force a surrender." Each option had merits and risks. As I weighed the alternatives, I remembered a lesson from Richard. Sometimes, the obvious path is a trap. Think about what your opponent expects you to do, and then do something different. "What if we use a hybrid approach?" I proposed. "We position ourselves for a visible blockade, but simultaneously send a small team in an inflatable boat around the blind side of the ship during twilight." The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Rivera, nodded slowly. "We could use drones to divert the pirates' attention to the opposite side." We refined the plan for hours, considering every contingency. When we finally began the operation, my heart was pounding, but my voice remained steady over the communications. The operation was a success. Our VBSS team managed to board the ship secretly, neutralize the pirates, and free the 18 hostages without casualties. So when the sailors and hostages returned to the Intrepid, I felt an indescribable sense of pride. "Good job, Commander," said one of the hostages, a Filipino engineer, as he received medical attention. "You saved our lives." "My team saved your lives," I corrected gently. "I just pointed you in the right direction." That mission set the tone for our deployment. In the following months, we safely escorted dozens of commercial vessels, participated in multilateral exercises with allied navies, and responded to 2 humanitarian emergencies following devastating storms off the coast of Somalia. With each challenge, our cohesion as a crew grew stronger. I began to understand what my professors at the academy meant when they said that a ship is not just a war platform, but a living organism, each person a vital part of the whole. In my stateroom, I kept 2 photographs, one from my graduation with my mother and Richard, and another from the moment I took command of the Intrepid. Looking at them at night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me. There are the challenges, the doubts, the small and large victories. 6 months later, we received orders to return to the United States. Our mission had been deemed an exemplary success, with formal commendations from Fleet Command. I was eager to see my family again and share my experiences. However, 3 days before we were to begin our return journey, we received an urgent message. An Allied submarine had lost power and was stuck at the bottom, approximately 300 meters deep. The oxygen on board would last only 48 hours. We were the only adequately equipped rescue vessel in the change of plans, I announced to the crew over intercom. "We're redirecting to a submarine rescue operation. I know everyone is anxious to get home, but there are 82 sailors down there counting on us. We'll get them back to their families." The response was immediate and unanimous. All hands on deck, ready for the mission. We redirected our course at full speed while the underwater rescue specialists prepared the equipment We arrived at the site within 14 hours. The weather was deteriorating, with 4-meter waves making any operation extremely dangerous. "Commander," the rescue team leader informed me, "with these conditions, our standard procedures are impossible. The rescue vehicle will not be able to dock with the submarine in these waves." It was the kind of moment no amount of training fully prepares you for lives on the line, time running out, and no good options. I called my senior officers back together. "We need to think outside the box. How can we stabilize the rescue vehicle under these conditions?" After intense debate, our chief engineer, Commander Rodriguez, presented an unconventional idea. "What if we create an artificial calm zone? We could position the ship to break the waves and simultaneously use our boats to disperse a surface tension-reducing agent into the water." It was risky, experimental, but possible. "How long to implement?" I asked. 3 hours to set everything up, Commander. They have less than 30 hours of airtime. Make it happen in 2. The next few hours were a frenzy of coordinated activity. While the engineering team prepared the equipment, I maintained constant communication with the submarine via underwater transmission. "USS Intrepid to HMS Venture, we are implementing the rescue. Stay calm and conserve oxygen. We're getting you out of there." The submarine commander's voice was remarkably controlled, despite the desperate situation. "Received, Intrepid. We trust you." That trust of strangers placing their lives in our hands weighed heavily on me as I watched the bridge preparation. I fingered Richard's compass in my pocket, seeking the same trust he had finally placed in me. When everything was ready, I gave the order. "Begin rescue operation." The Intrepid strategically positioned itself, creating a partially protected zone. The boats released the stress-reducing aids, which effectively calmed the water surface in a limited area. The underwater rescue vehicle was launched, guided by our best operators. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. Every communication from the rescue vehicle was amplified by the control room. Every small progress celebrated, every complication faced with determination. "Commander," the vehicle operator's voice finally announced, "docking successful. Initiating personnel transfer." A collective sigh of relief swept across the bridge. But it wasn't time to celebrate. We still needed to get everyone safely to the surface. The rescue operation continued for 18 hours, with the vehicle making multiple trips. When the last sailor from the submarine stepped onto the deck of the Intrepid, exhausted but alive, I finally allowed myself a moment of emotion. "Mission accomplished," I announced over the intercom. "All aboard and safe. Well done, Intrepid." The crew broke into spontaneous applause throughout the ship. The submarine's commander, a British veteran of 30 years of service, shook my hand tightly. "Commander Hayes, your ingenuity saved my crew. The Royal Navy will not forget this." Our return to the United States, though delayed by a week, was triumphant. The story of the submarine rescue had spread, and we were received with honors at the port of Norfolk. Families waited on the dock, along with senior officers and, to my surprise, journalists. Among the crowd, I spotted my mother and Richard. She waved a small American flag while he stood erect, almost at attention, watching the ship dock with a look I'd never seen before, pure, sincere pride. When I finally disembarked, after ensuring all docking procedures, I was greeted with an impromptu ceremony. Admiral Fletcher, commander of the Atlantic Fleet, was present. "Commander Hayes," he said, shaking my hand, "your performance as captain of the Intrepid has been exemplary. The rescue of HMS Venture will be studied in the naval academies for years to come. Thank you, sir." "But the credit belongs to my crew. A crew reflects its commander," he replied. "And speaking of which, I have something to discuss with you later this week. It involves your next deployment." After the formalities, I finally hugged my mother and shook Richard's hand. "You're thinner," my mother commented, always attentive to details. "Ship command doesn't leave much time for regular meals," I replied, smiling. Richard looked uncomfortable, as if he wanted to say something but didn't. "Know how?" Finally, he simply said, "Your father would be proud, Alexandra. Both of your parents." Those words, simple yet profound, meant more than any official ceremony. Over the next few days, I enjoyed a brief leave of absence, savoring the normalcy of life ashore. I helped Richard repair the roof, walked with my mother along the beach where I grew up, and even visited my old school, where I was invited to speak to the students about a career in the Navy. A young girl of about 14 raised her hand during the question session. Commander Hayes, have you ever been afraid? As a leader, I mean. The question took me by surprise with its insight. Every day, I answered honestly. Fear of making the wrong decision, fear of disappointing the people who trust me, fear of not being up to the challenge. But I've learned that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. Another student asked, "What was the moment you knew you were on the right path?" Immediately, the memory of the graduation ceremony came to mind, the moment my stepfather told me I was finished, and minutes later the cadet passed out with his rifle. It was during my graduation from the Naval Academy, I explained. A cadet fainted during the ceremony, and I instinctively stepped in to help him and keep the formation intact. In that moment, I realized that all the doubts I'd faced, all the obstacles I'd overcome, had prepared me to react. Sometimes, you don't know you're ready until you're tested. On my last night home, Richard invited me for a stroll around the harbor. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, while fishing boats returned from a day at sea. "I remember the day your mother introduced me to you," he said, breaking a long silence. A little girl with serious eyes who looked at me as if she were evaluating me for a high-risk mission. I laughed at the accurate description. I was a difficult child. "No," he corrected, "you were determined. I was the one who was difficult, inflexible, unable to see beyond my own disappointment." We walked a little further before he continued. "When I met your mother, I was in a dark place. My Navy career had ended bitterly, and I blamed everyone but myself. Then along came this girl, who dreamed of the same world that had rejected me. ... It was easier to try to discourage her than to admit my own failures." "Richard, you don't have to. I do," he interrupted, "because I want you to know, you proved me wrong in every way possible, and for that, I'm grateful. You didn't just survive, you thrived. And in the process, you taught me something about second chances." We stopped at a dock, staring out at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. "That compass I gave you," he continued, "my father told me it always points home, no matter how far you sail." I think I finally understand what he meant. The next day, I returned to Norfolk for my meeting with Admiral Fletcher. His office at Fleet Command was decorated with naval memorabilia and strategic maps covering entire walls. "Commander Hayes," he began, without preamble, "we are reorganizing our carrier group in the Pacific, and we need a new captain for the USS Defiant. She is a guided missile cruiser, more robust than the Intrepid, and with more complex missions. After what I have seen in your current command, I believe you are the right person for the job." It was a significant promotion. The Defiant was a larger, more strategic ship, typically commanded by officers with more years of experience. "It's an honor to be considered, Admiral," I replied. "When would the transfer of command be?" 6 weeks. Enough time to complete your tour on the Intrepid and prepare for the new challenge." I left the office with my head spinning with possibilities. In just a few years, I had gone from a self-doubting cadet to commander of one of the fleet's flagship warships. The journey had been anything but easy, but every challenge, every obstacle, every moment of doubt had paved the way for me to this point. That night, alone in my apartment in Norfolk, I wrote in my diary, "Today I was offered an opportunity I never imagined I would achieve so soon." When I think about the girl I was, determined yet insecure, ambitious yet full of doubts, I barely recognize the connection with the officer I have become. I remember the day of my graduation, when Richard told me I was done. At the time, I interpreted it as yet another demonstration of his lack of faith in me. Now I see that perhaps he was partly right, though not in the way he intended. The Alexandra who entered the academy, eager to prove herself, defined by her desire for validation, was truly finished. In her place emerged someone who understands that leadership is not about personal recognition, but about service to something greater. When that cadet passed out and I stabilized the formation, I wasn't thinking about impressing anyone or proving anything. I was simply doing what needed to be done. Perhaps that's the true test of character, not what we do when everyone is watching, but what we do instinctively when someone needs help. Tomorrow, I'll return to the Intrepid to inform my crew of the transfer. I know many will be disappointed, and part of me is too. We've formed a special bond during our time together, but I also know that this is the nature of naval service, the constant tide of change, new missions, new responsibilities. Wherever duty takes me, I will carry with me the lessons I have learned from my biological father, who loved the sea enough to give his life for it, from my mother, whose quiet strength always anchored me, from Richard, whose skepticism eventually turned into a respect I valued all the more for being hard-won, and from every sailor, officer, and mentor who has crossed my path. In the end, perhaps true command isn't about ships or missions or strategies. Perhaps it's about growing enough to see beyond our own needs and ambitions to serve a higher purpose. Perhaps it's about finding the courage not just to face stormy seas, but to lead others through them. And as I prepare for this next chapter, I feel a certainty I never knew before. No matter how difficult the challenge ahead, I'm ready to face it, not because I'm flawless or unshakable, but because I've finally understood that it's precisely through our imperfections and doubts that we find our true strength. From insecure cadet to confident commander, the journey continues. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that the ocean, like life, is always in motion. Our only choice is to navigate with purpose, integrity, and courage, especially when the waters get rough. I closed the journal and walked to the window, gazing at the lights of the naval port in the distance. Ships of all sizes rested in their berths, preparing for future missions in distance. Somewhere among them was the Intrepid, my first command, and beyond, the horizon where the Defiant awaited me. With Richard's compass in hand, I smiled at the unknown future. Whatever lay ahead, I was ready to sail,